Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the City and Guilds Advanced Manufacturing Skills event. People are going to keep coming through, so I'll just wait a minute or two before we get fully started. Please for now, people go on mute and cameras off just to save bandwidth. There will be a Q&A section at the end where we can invite people to ask questions live. Alternatively, please use the chat function to post any questions as we go, and we'll hopefully get to them at the end of the session. The meeting's being recorded, so both the recording and the slides will be shared following the event. So there are some links and various things within the slide deck that people can access. So I will get started. Gemma, next slide, please. So just first to introduce myself, I'm Joe Bell, one of the skills specialists here at City and Guilds. I'm in a team with Sarah Turner and Gemma Edwards. Gemma's here on the session today, and we work with organisations, usually large employers, both looking to use apprenticeships, qualifications, but also to implement their internal learning and development and skills strategies. So talk a little bit more about that later. But if anybody on this session would like to talk to us about skills in a kind of really broad sense, then we would love to hear from you. And you can see our contact details on the screen there. This is the agenda for the day. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about who City and Guilds are. Then we're going to look at the skills challenges within the sector. We're going to get into the panel introduction and discussion. There's going to be panel Q&A and opportunities for you to ask questions, both of City and Guilds and our panellists. And then we'll close out, and we aim to close before 12 o'clock. Please, as I say, just a reminder, make sure you're on mute, make sure cameras are off for now. And please do post any comments, feedback, and questions within the chat. We'd really love to hear from you, and we like to keep these sessions as interactive as possible. There will be some content that we'll deliver, but we do want to hear from you as well. Next, please. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about City and Guilds. And City and Guilds is probably a familiar brand to many of you on the session. I would probably venture a guess that you associate us with apprenticeships and with qualifications. And yes, we do that, but we do a lot more besides. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do now. Next slide, please. We've been around for almost 150 years. We're a global leader in vocational education and skills, and we work across a wide variety of industries. We're very purpose driven, and on the next slide you can see our purpose there. It is, and it has been for a long time, to help people, organizations and economies develop their skills for growth. We're really proud to be purpose driven, and so a great statistic there that 76% of City and Guilds learners progress into employment within 6 months. And that's what we're all about, getting people into employment and helping them progress through that employment. Today, we're going to talk about employment in the context of advanced manufacturing and engineering. Next slide, please. So these are some of the things that we do. And as I mentioned before, you're probably familiar with that kind of bottom left section, regulated qualifications, apprenticeships and endpoint assessment. And largely we work with the FE college market and training providers in that market. And, you know, many employers that are on the call will be using FE colleges to access those skills. However, the work that Gemma, Sarah and I do with employers can encompass that area as well. We do work with employers that want to deliver their own qualifications to their own staff, and actually some that want to take that step into delivering apprenticeships, both for their own internal workforce, but also across the wider sector. Now, we can support with that through obviously providing the qualifications, providing the apprenticeship endpoint assessment, but actually we can also help with consultancy advice, how to transition an organisation from solely an employer to an employer provider. So please do talk to us if any of that resonates with your skills strategy within your organisation. One of the most common things we do with organisations, kind of outside of that regulated qualification and apprenticeship market that we're most known for, is training and skills benchmarking. This means that any program that an employer has developed internally, so a program, whether it's within leadership, emerging leaders or senior leadership, or whether it's something technical about something really bespoke to your sector where a qualification doesn't exist, City and Guilds can accredit that program. And you see some examples there, for example, with Costa Coffee, British Airways, and Every, how we've worked with them to accredit and enable them to give more value to their programs and to their learners within the programs. The final two sections on this slide are training delivery. So we actually own training providers, and we can do direct provision of regulated and unregulated training, and leadership development solutions. So ILM and the Oxford Group are part of City and Guilds. They provide our leadership development solutions across all levels of leadership. So again, talk to us if you've got any particular challenges or projects within that area. Next, please. So now looking at the UK skills landscape, and this is a macro view of the whole UK skills landscape, just some general overviews. The three kind of points I wanted to mention was the current mismatch between education and labour market needs. Many of you on the call might be feeling this, and it's certainly one of the challenges that we need to overcome and that we'll discuss later on in this session. 57% of the learning and development professionals that we interviewed as part of this research were concerned that employees lack the right skills to execute business strategies. So the people that you're employing don't necessarily have the skills. And so that means that employers are inheriting the skills burden to an extent. Now, some of that can be met through apprenticeship. So people kind of within employment, you can spend apprenticeship levy to upskill those people. But there may be solutions outside of that as well through in-house programs or other solutions. And again, we'll talk about some of that on the session today. The next slide looks at the industrial strategy. And again, probably many of you on the call are familiar with this, but I wanted to just mention it. And there is a link there that's going to be shared afterwards. The government have chosen 8 key sectors, the IS8, and you can see that advanced manufacturing is top of the list. There are 2 additional sectors in construction and health and social care, so it should be really the IS10. These are key focus sectors for the UK economy. And what it means in terms of skills is that we will see more of a curriculum focus on these sector areas and government investment tied to these areas and new specialist technical colleges. If you want to talk more about IS8 and what this means, then please get in touch after the session. Next, please, Jen. Again, just a brief slide on the growth and skills levy. This represents an evolution of the current apprenticeship levy. There is still a lot that we don't know about this. So the caveat is that, there's still a lot that we're waiting to find out. But when we do know, we will be one of the first organisations to know because we've got the right people around the right tables. And we will run another event probably to talk in more detail about this. It will mean more flexibility for the apprenticeship levy. We're looking at apprenticeship units focused initially on digital, AI and engineering. So it's going to offer, more opportunities to spend apprenticeship levy, we hope, on more flexible solutions, because there are some challenges within the current model that I'm sure you're all aware of if you spend your levy. Next, please. And there's a link there to our apprenticeship reform webpage. So again, when you get the slides afterwards, feel free to favourite that link and have access to all the news as we know it. So looking now at advanced manufacturing as a sector. Now, these are 6 key areas of skills challenge that we picked out to highlight today. And I know that Jamie's going to talk more later about some of the challenges from a Make UK perspective as well, and Nigel from a Cyient perspective. So the 6 areas that I wanted to highlight was the absolute scale of the skills gap within the sector. 75% of manufacturers citing skills shortages as the single biggest barrier to growth, which obviously impacts innovation and productivity. Part of the issue there is recruitment and retention, with a large amount of manufacturing vacancies in the UK. Now, speaking to manufacturing and engineering organisations, a lot of this is driven by negative perceptions in the sector. It's something that we need to address as a sector to attract more people into the sector. There's an ageing workforce with 20% due to retire this year, which will lead to a severe experience deficit. So how do we capture all that experience and feed it into younger generations and get new people coming through that can benefit from that. Emerging skills needs, digital and automation, green skills, sustainable manufacturing. We talked about education before, and education really needs to keep pace, but there's a real crisis at the moment within further education in that they can't recruit enough staff, delivery staff and assessors to meet the needs of employers, because there's a really competitive jobs market. And if somebody's working in digital and automation, is it attractive for them to go and work in a college and help deliver that? So there's a real challenge there. Leadership and management is part of the challenge. We need really strong leaders that can help with the evolution of the sector. And within engineering and manufacturing, amongst other sectors, diversity is a key challenge. And the advanced manufacturing sector is predominantly male, white, and over 50. And the challenge there is that diverse teams drive innovation and fresh thinking. And if that's lacking, then that innovation is going to be hampered. Next slide, please. So overall, we need to work with the sector to attract, train, and upskill the workforce within the sector. So we're going to go over to our panel now. We're really grateful to have a couple of fantastic panelists today to give their perspectives, not only on the challenges, but hopefully on some of the solutions. I don't want this event to be all talking about, challenges and a bit doom and gloom. We do want to get on some innovations. And that means, anybody that's on the call as well, please do share any ideas, anything that you're doing that's innovative, particularly within skills. Today, we've got Jamie Cater from Make UK. Jamie leads Make UK's policy work on education and skills, representing the views of the organisation's 22,000 plus member companies across UK manufacturing and engineering and government. Jamie started his career working in the office of MP and Shadow Education Minister. Following this, he spent a number of years in consultancy, advising clients, including several independent training providers and membership organisations on government policy and regulation. And he joined Make UK in 2021 and also leads on wider workforce and labour market policy issues. We're also lucky to have Nigel Thomas from Cyient. Nigel leads sales for Cyient in the UK and EMEA, aerospace and defence market, providing engineering services to major global OEMs and tier one manufacturers. With 25 years of experience, he's managed tier one companies manufacturing civil and military aircraft components and delivering global supply chain services. Over the past 12 years, Nigel has overseen the design and delivery of enterprise IT and OT solutions for OEMs and tier one organisations in the UK. He also chairs ADS Digital Transformation for Aerospace and Defence Group, promoting the adoption of digital technologies in the UK aerospace sector. So thanks so much for joining us, Jamie and Nigel. We're going to start by handing over to Jamie for his take on some of the challenges we just talked about and an introduction for those that need it on the work of Make UK. So thanks, Jamie, over to you.
Thanks, Joe, and morning, everyone. Really good to be with you. I know Joe's given a bit of an overview of me, but for anyone who's not familiar with Make UK, we are the representative body for manufacturing and engineering employers in the UK. And we are also an independent training provider. So we see sort of both sides really of this question, the employer side and from the education sector's perspective as well. We've really been at the forefront, I would say, of the last few years of calling for an industrial strategy. And very pleased that last year the government has taken that forward, and we're now starting to see a little bit of progress on delivery of that. Around the time that government published the industrial strategy, we commissioned an industrial strategy skills commission in recognition of the fact that really that strategy will live or die on what the government does in relation to skills policy and supporting employer investment in training and public investment in skills training as well. And a lot of that work really kind of reflected what Joe has helpfully just set out. I think those 6 key challenges that Joe talked about really reflected in the work that the Commission did. And we really kind of focused on a couple of big topics and areas with that commission: how we support young people into industry, those kind of entry level, sort of early career roles in the sector, and that really tricky question, I think, of upskilling and retraining the existing workforce, what those kind of routes are, what they could look like. And we've made a number of recommendations for industry, the education sector, and government to collaborate and work together to try to really address those skills challenges. So if we can move on to the next slide. This was what we found in relation to the big challenges that employers in our sector are facing in getting people into those sort of entry, lower, intermediate level apprenticeship roles. And I'm sure lots of this will not be a surprise to people on this call. This will probably look pretty familiar and unsurprising. So that level of awareness of those routes among school leavers, that kind of readiness to enter the workplace at that sort of young age. One of the key issues that we addressed or sought to address with the Skills Commission were some of the constraints on the provider side. So what we hear a lot anecdotally, and we're seeing in a more material sense at the moment coming through from employers, is that they're seeing their local training providers scaling back, withdrawing really valuable engineering and manufacturing provision because it's just become too difficult or unviable for them to offer it. Either the delivery funding is too low, so the kind of funding bands for those apprenticeships are insufficient. Capital funding might be difficult to keep industry standard equipment and machinery for apprentices to learn on the provider site, and teacher recruitment and retention. So even if the kind of funding is adequate, even if you've been able to get nice new shiny bits of equipment onto your site as a provider, can you recruit and keep hold of the skilled teaching staff who are able to teach on that? So the combination of those three factors is really kind of materializing, I think, in significant difficulties, particularly in a subject area like engineering and manufacturing. It's just expensive. They are expensive apprenticeships to deliver. So we're really seeing that as a significant challenge at levels 2 and 3 in particular. If we can move on to the next slide. As I say, the other kind of thing that we looked to address was this question of upskilling and retraining. So I think that top one there is, again, it's something that Joe covered and absolutely right to do so. And I think it's something that perhaps is a little bit underappreciated in a sector like ours, which is that leadership and management skills gap. So that is a clear priority, as you can see there, for upskilling and retraining. And then probably, as you would expect, the sort of priority given to higher level technical skills, digital, data, and that sort of thing. But you can see there the clear priorities for where employers in our sector are looking to invest in their current workers. We can move on to the next slide. So we looked a little bit at how employers in the sector are currently upskilling and retraining staff, what the routes are. So predominantly there you can see it's apprenticeships or internal training modules. I think Joe spoke a little bit about the growth in skills levy. Lots of people will be aware that one of the aspects of that the government has been working on is these new apprenticeship units that are allegedly going to start to be rolled out from April. April is fast approaching, and I'm not sure many of us know really in practice what that is going to look like. But I think this is sort of the rationale really behind the government's thinking on apprenticeship units, which is that we see lots of employers using apprenticeships for upskilling and retraining because it's a brand they trust, a model that they know and understand how it works, they know what it delivers. But in many cases, the full apprenticeship might actually be too large, too long, too involved, just to kind of give those sort of specific skills and areas of knowledge that someone needs to be upskilled to do a slightly different role or adapt to something slightly different. So that flexibility, I think, is what the government is trying to achieve. Whether the apprenticeship units manage to do that successfully, I think remains to be seen. On internal training modules, something we heard a lot from employers in that context was that there is very little meaningful support from government for them to do that. It can be quite a significant cost. They don't necessarily see where government provided programs can do that. And there's none of the sort of financial support for that investment in human capital as they might get for investing in a new piece of machinery or that kind of physical capital. That development of human capital is not sort of incentivized or supported in the same way. Next slide, please. So to try to finish on a sort of positive note rather than all of the challenges that people are facing, we heard a lot from employers over the course of that work about things that are working well, things that employers are trying out and doing that have had some success. So their sort of collaboration with training providers, we heard lots of really good, encouraging, interesting stories about how SMEs in the sector are working together with their local providers. We heard a lot about sort of supporting co-investing in the development of sort of new resources, new provision. There was one employer in the east of England working with their local FE college to set up a new kind of AI digital skills lab, which was pretty cool, really interesting stuff going on there. Skills boot camps, I know there's mixed feedback and mixed experience of that route. Some of the combined authorities now seem to be moving away from that model, but we have heard success stories of where, in areas like welding, fabrication, those have been really effective routes to get people kind of skilled up relatively quickly in those occupations where there's a high level of demand, and really good kind of collaborative working there between employers, providers, whether that's through the combined authority, LSIPs, those sorts of forums. And again, I sort of mentioned the teaching staff issue. We heard from several employers that they have been able to second some of their skilled workers to the local FE college to support with the teaching of the apprentices, and that where employers have the capacity to be able to do that has worked really well. We also heard from employers about how they were kind of getting involved from an early age and an early stage, working with the school system, so supporting with development of provision around employability skills, soft skills, communication skills, working with UTCs and academies in particular, where you have more scope for that kind of technical vocational route in the pre-16 system. So co-designing those programs around engineering, design and technology, and that having a really positive impact on apprenticeship pipelines. And actually going so far as sponsoring academies. One of our member companies that we went to visit with the Commission up in the East Midlands, doing brilliant work with a group of schools that they have sponsored and have developed those sort of employability skills, engineering, technical, vocational routes, and it is having a really positive effect, not just for their business, but for their sort of supply chains, other manufacturing businesses in the area. So some really interesting and innovative stuff going on across the sector. Final slide, I think. So that's just a bit of a plug for the report. I'm not going to go through all the recommendations and everything, but if you scan the QR code or click on the link when you have the slides after the session, you'll be able to have a read through and see some of the recommendations that we made. That's it for me, I think. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Jamie. We'll come back to Jamie with some questions later, but I wanted to give Nigel the opportunity to introduce us to the work of Cyient and his perspectives on the challenges that we talked about. Again, any questions and comments, please do put them in the message box. Over to you, Nigel.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Jamie. Joe gave me a sort of a short intro. I'd just like to add, I've been in this sector, actually, it's really two sectors, I suppose, aerospace and defence, for the last 25, 26 years. I sort of fell into it by accident, but there aren't many sectors where you have something as wondrous as the ability to make human beings fly, to sort of keep you in once you've been attracted into the sector. And I think there's an element of that sort of magic that keeps people working in the sector, as well as some of the things I'm just going to share with you now. So if you could just move to the next slide, please, Amanda. If we look at what Joe laid out earlier, which is, it's all about the ability to attract, train, and retain staff. Well, from an attractiveness point of view, salaries across both aerospace and defence, there are some different dynamics. I will come to that in a second, but they're generally treated as one industrial area. Salaries are 16% above the average for the types of work that people are doing. So whether that be engineering or manufacturing or working in any of the sort of back office functions in those sorts of companies, it pays well. The sector as a whole, taken together, delivers about £100 billion of turnover each year. 42 billion of that is classified as value add. So that's different ways of calculating that, but it's through productivity and efficiency gains for the country, for UK PLC. So it's a big sector, employing, as you can see there, nearly 500,000 people directly, and that's not counting the sort of the supply chain jobs that are related to the work that's actually done. And from an apprenticeship point of view, there's a lot of apprentices employed, 26,000, most of which, the biggest number is in the MOD. But if you take the UK's biggest aerospace and defence contractor, BAE Systems, for instance, this year alone, they are aiming to take on 2,300 apprentices directly into their business, 600 plus of which are in aerospace, and the rest across the other sectors which they cover, whether that be land or maritime. So it's a big employer of apprentices, and that sort of speaks well to the intention of companies to invest their shareholders' money in developing the skills of people straight out of education and growing their own workforce. And I'll come back to the reason why there needs to be more of that in a second. And then interestingly, that sort of geographic spread, whilst most sort of economic commentators around the UK focus on the centre of gravity around London, actually the sector I've chosen to work in covers the whole of the UK, and that's for historic reasons, and I'm glad it is, really. So whether that's maritime, being based out of areas like Plymouth, Portsmouth, or Cumbria or Scotland, the fact they're there means that future investment is there also, which means that not all of the jobs growth is centred around the southeast, which is rather good. And I've got a graphic to illustrate that in a second. And those jobs, the sort of 500,000 or nearly 500,000 jobs in the sector has grown by 30% in the last 30 years. All of the numbers are growth numbers. 57% growth in that revenue that I talked about, the £100 billion per year. And equally, there's the value add that I talked about, well, that's grown by 25% as well over the last 10 years. And any watchers of the economic pronouncements of the UK as to why we are perhaps not globally as competitive as we should be, everybody focuses on productivity. We might work longer hours and prospectively harder than some of our European colleagues, but we're not as productive. Well, in this sector, if we are attracting the right people, we're paying more than the average, and we're employing lots of people, and it's growing, and productivity is also growing. So we're doing pretty well, even given the fact that, for instance, we don't make any of our own commercial aircraft anymore. We make wings and engines and systems and interiors, but we don't actually make whole aircraft. We do in defense, and we make submarines, and we make a lot of land-based equipment. But we're contributing to generally, we're contributing to the health and well-being of other companies, companies like Airbus and Boeing, for instance, who making the actual aircraft. But we're good at it. So from an industrial base that's to some degree being denuded of large-scale production, actually we are busy worker bees. We're good, and the jobs that we offer themselves are also inherently good as well. They're interesting in an interesting sector, and paying more than the average. So where's it going? Well, if you come back and I split the two sectors and look at the factors driving the growth for civil aerospace, for instance, nobody really seems to be wanting to fly less. Everybody wants to have more holidays, whether that's short haul or long haul, but we want to fly differently. We want to be greener. We want to have less of an effect on the environment in terms of noxious substances and noise. But we also, both individuals, I think, want to pay less. However, that might not be the case. The green lobby is definitely a strong one in aerospace. If you even Greta Thunberg, if she flew anywhere, I think she would be cancelled immediately. But I think aerospace it delivers something like 3.5% of the global CO2 production, but actually delivers 20% of global GDP. So it's a disproportionate contribution to the narrative. However, we do want to go further for less. So there's constant re-engineering of both aircraft to make them aerodynamically better. Therefore, engines are being constantly redesigned to be more economical, use less fuel, use different fuel, so not carbon-intensive fuel, looking at alternative fuel uses and synthetic fuels. So, on the back of that, it means that aircraft, perversely, whereas in the past they would have a life of maybe 35, 40 years, some aircraft are now being scrapped after half a dozen years, so 5 or 6 years, because they're no longer efficient enough to meet the needs of the industry and us as consumers. So we've got a huge growth market there. If you wanted to buy a short-haul aircraft, no. If you were rich enough to want to buy one at the moment, you'd have to wait 9 years for one. So it's a hugely vibrant industry. And I'll come back to what the blockers are on producing aircraft shortly. Then you look at the defense industry, and obviously, right now we're in a hugely volatile geopolitical environment. And therefore, all countries are looking to increase their defense spending, not least because America doesn't want to support everybody else's defense, but actually it's probably the right thing to do. We're currently spending 2.3% of GDP, which is about £60 billion per year on defense. We've committed to upping that to 2.5% by 2027, so the end of next year. It doesn't seem a lot of difference, 0.2%, but actually adds 13 billion to the annual expenditure. And we're looking to eventually get to 3% by 2035 and 5% beyond that. So the investment in jobs in the defense industry is not going to slow down. And really, that's where we come around to what the blockers are in terms of being able to either to buy your own private jet, or if you're Ryanair or any of the low-cost airlines or the big international airlines, the ability to get your fleet renewed and operating at lower cost to deliver better experience to us as consumers, or to better financial performance to your shareholders, they really need to see a change, and that change is underwritten in, as Joe said, the industrial strategy document. It's quite scarily, it acknowledges not just a shortage of the right skills, but a growing shortage of the right skills. We as a sector really don't have, and I think this was reflected in Jamie's sort of bar charts of skills demand. We don't have enough engineers with the right level of experience and then the right level of digital skills to take advantage of the technologies that are available at the moment. So AI is pretty ubiquitous everywhere. We need engineers on the shop floor, so to speak, that are skilled in the ability to write prompts for AI, skilled in the ability to do data analytics at speed, which increasingly for these large computational problems working in aerospace or nuclear industries need quantum computing capabilities. It's a very different type of engineer we need now than we needed 5-10 years ago, and combine that with the aging profile of an engineer. When I first started in aerospace back in 2000, the average age of an aerospace engineer was 56. Now it's 57. Then I thought 56 was ancient. Now that I'm past 60, 57 is quite young, isn't it, really? But we are presiding over an industry that is losing a lot of the knowledge that's needed to go with the digital skill that is needed. And there's a gap. And as I said, the industrial strategy itself identifies it as a growing shortage, which is quite worrying. So next slide, please, Amanda. So the skills challenge, as I said, here's a good handy map from the MOD. It doesn't show all locations, but pretty much shows the spread, and pretty much the civil aerospace industry is co-located with these people. So for instance, GKN in Bristol also look after some equipment they make for Airbus, as well as defence programs out of Bristol, but the Isle of Wight is missing. So it's representative, not in its entirety. The challenges that I identified in industrial strategy also come with some suggestions as to how the government are going to support a change in the infrastructure and behaviour to address these problems. And the first one, I think, is interesting: competition versus collaboration. Jamie talked about collaboration between manufacturers and training providers. Yes, that needs to increase. What the government is hinting at here is actually they expect industry to collaborate to deliver joint training programs. But for instance, I think welding got mentioned in Jamie's piece. Welding on a nuclear submarine is a tricky proposition, and it has to be right. And therefore it needs the highest level of technology and skills to go with that. But it's needed across different manufacturers. And I think there is a huge challenge here to get companies whose interests are in their own realm and for their own shareholders to collaborate across those boundaries to deliver training programs that allow a workforce to see a path for one or more careers across their working life, where they're not stuck with an individual employer, but can move, for instance, through the life cycle of a submarine, which might have 40 years, and you might start off working on the construction of maybe the tube of the submarine and end up supporting that, throughout your working life. But there is no current path for that. So that joint training program is a real challenge for businesses which are driven by the needs of their shareholders and their P&Ls. And innovation, I think also Joe mentioned innovation as well. It becomes a real challenge with innovation happening in the defence industry is being called wartime speed, not warp speed, but wartime speed. And again, that needs collaboration. It needs feeding in with young, new, agile brains with an inherently digital mindset, but alongside the experienced old hands with all the digital with all the engineering know-how. And it's a real challenge to create that blend across the industry base. There are infrastructure initiatives that the government is supporting, so destination defence, destination nuclear, and the creation of 5 defence technical colleges. We'll see how that works out. The government at the moment is distressingly doing a lot of U-turns on core elements. Today's U-turn is about digital ID for jobs, but they are committed to a defence skills passport to enable that unencumbered flow of people through the industry across their working life. The next slide, please, Amanda. It's my last slide. Just a comment which I picked out of a report that Simon Barnes, who's the managing director of BAE Systems Air Division. Our people are a strategic asset to the nation, which is really interesting. I thought it's acknowledging that implicitly, therefore, they are a strategic asset to BAE Systems, but to the nation. The nation's ability to react to defence threats and to maintain our independence is absolutely key to both UK PLC, to BAE Systems, and to the people who are doing the jobs. So I just thought I'd end on that sort of strategic comment, and maybe that might provoke some conversation as we're going along.
Joe. Thanks, Nigel. We'll come back to you with some questions, but just going back to Jamie for a second. I know, Jamie, you did outline some of this in your presentation, and one of the key things that came through was that collaboration between employers and training providers. Now, we've got employers on the call today. What are some of the key things that employers can do to engage with training providers productively? I mean, you mentioned, the seconding of staff from employers to FE, and that sounds great. Is that realistic? And again, comments from the room welcome. It sounds ideal, and that may be idealistic, but yeah, Jamie, just can you expand a little bit on some of those things that employers can do to work better with training providers?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think that seconding of staff it works well for employers who have the capacity to be able to do that, but lots of businesses already don't have enough skilled staff, on the shop floor to do what they need to do. So it can be really difficult, and it is not the solution to those staffing issues to expect employers just to kind of share they're already scarce resources in terms of skilled staff, but it does, where businesses are able to do that, really helps establish you as a kind of employer of choice in your local community. It means that people are being taught with by people who they know have really recent, relevant, up-to-date industry experience, rather than lots of great teachers in FE and ITPs, but someone who might not actually have worked in a business for a number of years. So there are benefits to that. The government does talk in the Post 16 white paper about kind of workforce exchanges between industry and the education sector. There probably does, if we want to expand that properly, there probably does need to be some more work done on how that is enabled, whether that's through financial support or whatever that might be. The other thing I would just say, in addition to what I covered in the presentation around using things like LSIPs and the combined authorities and the forums that they kind of provide for engagement between employers and providers, and you'd probably expect me to say this, is trade associations are a really valuable tool in this. We are able to act as a bit of a bridge between businesses and providers. as I say, we're a provider. We have FE colleges and other providers in our membership. And it can be really difficult, I know, for providers to, get in touch, reach out, connect with SMEs in particular. And so I would just kind of, encourage people on both sides to kind of, use us as Make UK, other sort of sector-based associations, trade associations,
and
to
City
make.
and Girls, Jamie, probably as well. And we've
Yeah,
got exactly. I think it's a time for employers to lean on the trade associations, awarding organisations, these
yeah,
large skills focused organisations that have got, we have the links to providers and employers. So yeah, I think there's a role for all of us within that. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Jamie. Did you have further points on that?
that's okay. No, that's all I wanted to share, I think.
Fantastic. Okay. Nigel, just going back to some of the things that you mentioned, and I mean, obviously in the opening we were maybe a little bit doom and gloom about some of the challenges of the sector, but that was offset with your points about some of the booming areas, I suppose, or some of the more optimistic areas of the sector. So how can we approach cross-skilling people in the sector to enable kind of horizontal career pathways between different aspects of engineering and manufacturing?
Yeah, it's a good point. Thanks, Joe. Aerospace and defence really is just a special instance of complex engineering and manufacturing, advanced engineering and manufacturing. But there are core elements, and we're working with several clients at the moment who are multinational OEMs and manufacturers, tier one manufacturers, where we are looking at identifying core common skills and competencies in other areas. So I'll take two areas that have some similarities. So aerospace and the rail industry. So if you're a design engineer working on designing, let's say, the aircraft itself, the metal tube, you may have come from designing another metal tube that carries people from A to B at speed, a train. However, one goes at 100 plus miles an hour, another one at 600 miles an hour. But the core design considerations and probably the core elements in a degree level course would carry a lot of similarities. And we are looking at, particularly with one company, looking at an approach to take people in with skills and experience in rail, and then providing with the client the skills factory approach, if you like, to upskill them and make them familiar with the constraints of the aerospace industry. And it works for everybody. Unfortunately, of course, what it does is move the point of pain from one sector to another. So whereas aerospace has a huge deficit of skilled design engineers, we could solve one problem in aerospace and create another problem in rail. But the idea is sound, and we are working through that at the moment with a couple of training providers and looking to run the first cohort of that sometime in the second half of this year. But yeah, I think it's about being really hard-edged and looking at what are the core requirements, and then looking at how you take that raw material in, add value, and turn out happy, productive employees with the right skills at the end of it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nigel. I like that skills factory idea, and that could be formalised through some of the things that City and Guilds do as well through accreditation. I think if we're thinking innovatively, then we're not bound by all the constraints within the regulated and the time delays that impact the regulated market. If we're prepared to just kind of start developing things ourselves. Just kind of building on that, you mentioned, I think in your bio and in your introduction about digital technology.
Yeah.
I mean, digital skills. I think I could be doing this. We could be doing this presentation for any sector, and be talking about digital skills, and we do. And it's because they're important across so many sectors. But what's the particular challenge for complex engineering and manufacturing in aerospace and defence? You know, how do digital skills kind of impact in the sector?
Yeah, I think it's relatively easy if you're a BAE Systems or a GKN and you're a publicly listed company and you've got the ability to raise funds and make investments. If you are in the middle ground, and I think something like 80% of the total workforce in aerospace and defence sits within the SME layers, it's really difficult. You may be aligned to two or more OEMs at the top of your supply chain, and they are typically wanting to make investment in one or other software vendor's technology stack. And they often then recommend, if you want to be part of my supply chain, you also have to invest in this technology stack, which may not be the same one as a different customer. And it becomes a real problem. At the moment in aerospace, the sort of tier ones, typically they manage it. Tier twos and below are really struggling with, where do I place my bets for a digital future so that I am viable in the future, whether that's in AI to make me more competitive in terms of cost competitive and reducing my back office costs so I can reflect that in prices of material, or whether it's about aligning myself so I'm digital and my business is model based, so I do all of my engineering in model based systems, and I'm able to converse with I don't know whether it's Airbus or Rolls-Royce or anybody else in the language that they need to be conversed in with regards to digital information. And it's really a big problem. The route to funding and support funding for SME companies, so anything under 250 employees, is a real challenge, and existential. We did a survey at ADS 2 years ago, and most people spend a little bit and then they stop and they are stuck and they're inherently analog, and the world is becoming inherently digital. And we really need to acknowledge that and do something about it.
Thanks, Nigel. And thanks, Jamie, for your contributions. We're now going to kind of turn to a more open discussion Q&A for the audience. We've got just short of 10 minutes of the session left. I have been trying to monitor and thanks so much for the questions and insights shared in the sidebar. Just looking at the question from James, and Jamie, I'm going to put this to you. It might not be necessarily one for you. James is from a training provider, looking for forums that can potentially bring together providers and employers. And I know you've got a vested interest as a provider yourself, Jamie, but is there, from a Make UK perspective, do you see forums that have this kind that get all the different players in a room to kind of help to work together?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know where James is in the country, but sort of local, regional forums, I think, exist in different forms in different places for different sort of subsectors of manufacturing. At the risk of sounding overly sort of self-promotional, I would suggest, our sort of Make UK team has a presence in each region of the country. And sort of depending where you are, the sorts of employers you're working with, they would absolutely be able to support you with that. So whether that's us kind of acting directly as a sort of broker of some of those relationships, or if it's the local skills improvement plan and whoever is running that in your local area. And as I say, there are often sort of skills partnerships or boards or things like that for specific manufacturing subsectors. So there'd be plenty of opportunities, but sort of happy to connect James to anyone in the Make UK team if that'd be helpful.
Thanks, Jamie. And an opportunity for self-promotion is the least we can do for your time this morning. So don't worry about that. So great there, James. Some really practical next step from Jamie. Nigel, there is a question directed directly to you, and I suppose it's flipping round your model of the rail industry potentially supporting the aerospace industry, and how Ruben asks about how the aerospace industry could potentially support the rail industry with skills. Maybe a bit of a challenging question, but
no, I've just typed an answer actually, and before I press send, I'll give you the verbal version.
okay, thanks.
'Cause I think it's a good question. I think that whilst I'm an aerospace and defence geek, actually I have other rail geeks who work for Cyient also. We're a global company, 16,000 engineers we employ. Whilst aerospace and defence is our largest sector, rail and transportation is right behind it as the second. Well, actually aligned with nuclear. So we have a lot of exactly this sort of work going on in different sectors. I suppose I'm being a little parochial in saying, well, as long as I can service my aerospace and defence clients and I get engineers from rail, that's fine. But I have colleagues who are in the rail industry saying, okay, how can I deal with the same challenge in their sector? So that's my rather glib answer, and I'm not worried like Jamie is about self-promotion. So if anybody wants to have a chat about this afterwards, just ping me on LinkedIn, or if you don't mind being a broker, Joe, in terms of people contacting you and sending questions on. I'm happy.
Absolutely, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, feel free to, if you've got any follow-up questions for Jamie or Nigel, I'm happy to field them and feed them out. And obviously, we'll talk. Actually, we've got a couple of end slides that we'll get to that talks about the City and Guilds employer community as well. So in terms of bringing different employers together, if you want to get views from different sectors, and then we've got events coming up and we've got opportunities to do that. Just looking at the time, so there are some other general points, and there was a great post from Sharon, particularly talking about attracting young women into the sector, and how education needs to play a part in this. I don't know again if either of our panelists have a particular. It's a challenge, in engineering, but in other sectors like construction as well, about how the sector can attract more young female talent.
I think thanks, Nigel. Just a very quick couple of points. Completely agree, and I think some really really good responses that I've already read in the chat to that point, so I won't go back over it. Just to kind of make the point that we were commissioned by the government in the industrial strategy to lead a task force on increasing the proportion of the advanced manufacturing workforce that is female to 35% by 2035. Given some of the figures we know, like the one Nigel posted, around 22%, which is pretty good actually. But
yeah, well, we're really proud of it, but it's only 22%.
Yeah. So 35% is ambitious, to say the least, in sort of now under 10 years, but we think it's right to be ambitious about it. And the role of education is something we'll be considering with that group. So hopefully there'll be more on that sort of in the public domain soon, but it's top of the list for the task force that was in the industrial strategy.
Thanks, Jamie. Great to hear that you're on the case at Make UK within that as well. And obviously it's an issue that we know about. Just Gemma, can you just bring up the final couple of slides? If there's any, obviously, because we're following up, we'll have contact details. Any questions that you want to follow up with, please do get in touch. But I think we just need to wrap the session up. So just to close from me, I mean, this event is part of our employer community events. We do bring together employers. A lot of them are kind of cross-sector, more generic on themes, where you get engineering employers in the room with retail employers and rail employers and all sorts of different types of organisations. Please do reach out to us on the email addresses we provided on one of the earlier slides. If you would like to be added to our circulation list, we do a monthly insights newsletter with any new news, policy announcements, things like the Growth and Skills Levy. We have upcoming events, which are on the next slide. We have podcasts. If you just go to the next slide, please, Jem. These are the events. So obviously some past events on here as well. We're currently at the 14th of January. So we have an event coming up for the construction sector on the 24th. That's going to be in London. The 18th of March, we have measuring the impact and return on investment of training. We have more of a generic Learning and Development Connect event in London in April, and then one in Wakefield, North and South. And you can see, so if you want invitations to these events, they're all free to attend. Obviously, the in-person ones will be limited in terms of space, but usually we try and get a nice big room. So please do continue to engage with the conversation with us on that, and get in touch if you want to be added to that. I think, is that the final slide, Jen? Yeah, okay. And just some key links there to some of the stats that we referenced in the earlier slides. It's bang on 12 o'clock. Thank you so much to Jamie and Nigel for your insights and your time this morning. Obviously, thanks for everybody else for joining us. We will share a recording, slides, some key links and information within the next couple of days. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe.